Well, welcome to my kitchen. I'm Angela and it's Halloween today. So happy Halloween. I hope everyone had fun and were safe for their Halloween adventures. We've got older kids and so there's no trick-or-treating and dressing up today, but we'll be passing out candy later on. This is somewhat of an impromptu video. So if my kitchen is a mess, I'm sorry, that's real life, and I definitely have a lot of going-ons in the background. But I just thought it'd be fun to kind of bring you along to show you what an average day here in my kitchen might look like come dinner time. We've got leftovers, but we don't have enough leftovers to carry to the whole family. We kind of have like bits and bobs. And so when discussing dinner, my husband said there's some leftover steak that he wanted. My nephew said he wanted a leftover hamburger. There isn't enough then for each person to have the same leftover, or if there is a little bit left, my daughter and I just kind of weren't feeling it. So that's where my canning pantry comes along for nights like this. I don't have to make a huge brand new meal and hope that leftovers get eaten. Leftovers will get ate, and my daughter and I can have somewhat of a smaller scaled dinner, portioned more properly, just for her and me tonight for dinner. So, I don't know why, but I've really been craving like a beef gravy, mashed potato type of a meal, and I've never had this before, but I see it all of the time when on any sort of social media and somebody from the UK is cooking. They have what is called a Yorkshire pudding, and it looks lovely. I don't even know how to describe it. You guys probably, most of you I'm sure, are familiar to what that is, but it's kind of like a breading, a roll if you will, but it's like constructed to where it's got like a well on the inside of the bread, and then they, if it's big enough, they'll put their food inside of there and pour beef gravy all over it, and it just looks amazing. I love everything that has to do with gravy and mashed potatoes and bread, so sign me up. So I went on Pinterest, found a recipe. It's incredibly easy. 3 ingredients plus salt, so I guess 4 ingredients. It kind of reminds me of a popover. So if you are very acquainted with the UK and their culture and Yorkshire, and you are also familiar with a popover, let me know if that's actually the same thing. Is it relatively similar enough? Because what's going to happen is we're going to put the batter inside these pans in a hot oven. These will be hot. We're going to put the batter inside and get it back into the hot oven, and it's going to puff up. And upon taking out the containers here, it'll deflate, and I think then that's kind of what makes the well. I also don't want a ton of these, so I'm going to use these here that I got. I love picking these type of dishes up from the Goodwill. I am positive I got each of these for under $1, and they're Corningware, so they're fantastic brand. So I'm just going to see how much the batter makes, and I'm going to attempt to make 4. It's got to be enough because I think the recipe says it'll make 12. It has you getting out a muffin tin, so, and I don't want small ones, I want large ones. So it's just my daughter and I, but if we have leftovers I might enjoy it tomorrow, or I'll see, I'll test it with 1 or 2 to see if they're freezer friendly. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to set my oven to 425. I'm going to put these in there and let it come up to temperature while my oven is preheating. These also puff up, so I have the rack on the lowest setting. It tends to stay there anymore these days because between all of the breads and sourdough that I've been making, that just tends to be where it stays. So we're going to get the batter together while my oven is preheating. So basically we need flour, salt, milk, and eggs, and then you need some sort of an oil for the inside of your pans. I am going to use, I've not actually decided. It's going to either be bacon grease or tallow. Actually, I think I already decided. I'm going to use tallow because the bacon grease doesn't necessarily always lend that bacon flavor. But given how I'm using it tonight and not knowing if I have leftovers, how I'm going to use it, I may want a neutral as tallow can be anyhow. But you could certainly use some sort of a vegetable oil, canola, olive oil. It is at a high temperature though, so just keep in mind of your smoke points. Olive oil is okay. Extra virgin olive oil, probably not. Okay, so also what I'm going to do is I generally hardly ever use what the South would call sweet milk. The milk that is in the refrigerator that you use for cereal, for drinking, things like that. I generally don't use that. It's very expensive. Milk has gotten very expensive, and my teenager will suck down milk like there's no tomorrow. So I generally try not to use that. There are a few occasions where I feel like the difference matters and the full fat of the milk that we purchase lends whatever I'm making. But more times than not, I will use my powdered milk. This is freeze-dried milk. I have freeze-dried milk that I have freeze-dried myself, but for the most part, I just use a commercial type of powdered milk, and that's what I use for practically all of my baking. And the way I reconstitute it for what I have currently is 1/3 cup of dry to 7/8 cup of water. I just do a whole cup. It never steers me wrong. And I just mix it up, and then I basically have milk. And what's nice about this is there's a lot of recipes where you might need room temperature milk, or maybe even hot milk where you need to simmer it for just a little bit. I can control the temperature by the temperature of the water coming out of my faucet. So you don't necessarily have to think ahead. You can control the temperature as soon as you mix it up, which is really nice. We need 1 cup of flour. We don't live in a neighborhood that has a ton of trick-or-treaters. We are on a double cul-de-sac, and we have each of our properties generally has about a minimum of 5 acres, but it's not usually 5 acres in between each of us. It tends to go long ways in the back. But there is quite a bit of distance between me and our, neighbor, and the main street we're off of is a 55 mile per hour street. So you literally would have to drive to get into our development. Basically, if you're pulling into our development, it's because you live here or you're visiting somebody. So other than the people that live here, and then maybe some cousins and stuff come over, we don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters. That's kind of something I miss about living in a more suburban city type of setting, but I would say that's probably the only thing, because I like living where it's somewhat quiet and rural, but not too rural, It's like a happy medium. Okay. That's still preheating. I'm gonna crack my eggs into this bowl. My hens are still on vacation. I have not one laying even one random egg from time to time. So the 6 older girls that I have, I think, come springtime, it might be super sporadic with them. It was starting to get very sporadic to begin with. And then my new girls, I don't suspect finding any new eggs from them until maybe December. And of course, they're not going to be laying consistently until probably closer to the springtime. So we have to purchase eggs. I do have eggs that are water glassed, which actually would have been perfect for something like this. I have discovered that I find there is a taste difference with water glass eggs. I don't like them for eating as just an egg for like breakfast, but using them inside of a baked good doesn't bother me. I really should have used those for something like this. I forget, it's my first year water glassing fresh eggs, so not in the habit of it. I have freeze-dried eggs too, which you've seen me use when I made the mandarin orange bread. Those work really well as well. All right, I'm just mixing my eggs and my milk together. 1 cup of milk and 3 eggs to 1 cup of flour. I imagine it'll make somewhat like a pancake type of consistency maybe. And we need half a teaspoon of salt. Once the oven comes up to temperature, I'm going to remove the pan. I'm going to add in the tallow to the bottom of each of the pans. And it says to add enough to where it's about a 1/4 cup full, depending on the size of the vessel that you use, of course. Could be more, could be less per container than what I'm using. And then it's going to go back into the oven for several minutes, because when you pour this into your container, whatever it is you're using to bake it in, it needs to be really hot. That's sort of what helps to activate everything that's in here. If you're also familiar, this reminds me an awful lot of a Dutch baby. Some people call it a German pancake, a Dutch baby, walls of Jericho. I've heard them kind of called all sorts of different, you know, it's mostly an egg dish, where this is definitely more flour heavy. But it's essentially the same thing. You want everything to be hot, then you pour in your batter, and then it'll rise and poof up in the oven. So it's basically very similar, I would imagine. Okay, the oven is preheated. I have my tallow. What I like to do, it's a good habit to get into, when your oven is preheated, let it sit there without opening your oven door for maybe a minimum of 5 minutes. This is especially true with a lot of bread baking. Preheating your oven means, of course, you are heating it to a certain degree. But once it's immediately to that temperature, if you go and open that door, all that heat escapes. Once you close the door, it quickly drops in temperature. Where if you let that oven get to temperature and stay there for quite a while, it maintains that temperature a lot easier and doesn't drop drastically. So with bread baking, I tend to let it sit there for about the last half hour of proofing time, so that my oven is at a good temperature. And I'm just out of habit, that's what I'm going to do now. I'll let it go another couple minutes before I take everything out. So in the meantime, I'm going to show you what my daughter and I will eat. I canned Swiss steak. So what I used was cube steak from last year's steer. I don't know what I did when I ordered those cuts from my last prior year. I did something wrong and I didn't realize it, because the amount of cubed beef we got back was ridiculous, and I had to find ways to use it. I still have so much of it from the prior steer, and then we know the story about my new steer coming, of course. So I decided to can it, and this will essentially play as a Salisbury steak is kind of what I was going for. I've not tasted it yet. It's in a beef broth, heavy with, there's onions in there, and then I forget actually what spices and stuff I used, but basically I made it to where this broth in here was a heavy beef flavor, because I want to turn it into a gravy. This isn't going to be enough gravy for the particular style dish we're doing tonight, so I am going to just use some of this Heinz gravy. I usually have just a couple jars of either beef, chicken, and turkey. I have none. This is actually the last one that I had on hand of the beef. So, and I'm not in a rush to go out and get any. I have other forms of gravy I could make if need be. I'm just doing what's simple and easy tonight. And then peas, because I'm going to make mushy peas. Never made that before. I have no idea. I don't know if there's even other flavors. I just know it's somewhat like pureed style peas. So we're going authentic as authentic can be in this house anyhow. So that's kind of the start of the show. And then of course the Yorkshire pudding that we are making. And mashed potatoes. We'll have mashed potatoes as well, which I'm going to make those from Instant. I have a big jar of just plain potato flakes, and I'll bring you along to show you how I kind of spruce those up. They're my family's absolute favorite potatoes, actually. So there's a lot of reason to like my homemade style mashed potatoes when I go through the whole work of boiling the potatoes and everything, but these end up being really good. I don't blame them. So I keep my tallow in the fridge, and of course, like any sort of fat, it gets hard when it gets cold, so I'm just gonna break it up. Okay, so these are good and hot. We're gonna get some fat into the bottoms here, and it's gonna melt right away because these are nice and hot. All right, these are gonna go back into the oven for a couple of minutes. The tallow that I'm using, I've actually ordered from Azure Standard. I have, my husband and I have a friend who raises his own cattle, renders his own lard and tallow, and has been trying to give us some for the longest time, and we've just not been able to meet up just yet. So, but if you're interested, I do get my tallow from Azure Standard. Okay, those went in the oven 20 to 25 minutes. You don't want to overfill because it's going to rise. So keep it, you know, just under half, I would say. Given the size of those containers, I was able to evenly divide it quite nicely, keeping it well under the halfway mark. So I shouldn't have to be too concerned of anything overflowing too greatly. In my saucepan over here, I'm going to drain all of the broth and liquid from this jar because I want to thicken it. Even though I'm adding an additional jar of gravy, I still want to utilize what's in here. I am working on getting that liquid thickened up into a gravy so that I can add my meat in a little bit and peeping in on how those Yorkshire puddings are doing, you can see this was probably 10 minutes in or so. You can see how they're already starting to rise. Very exciting. They are looking really beautiful. Temperature is 425 degrees. I will provide the link I used for the recipe down below. To make my mashed potatoes, it's very simple. I don't do any measurements. I just kind of eyeball the amount of flakes that I think I need, and I slowly will add in hot boiling water. It's very important to get those mashed potatoes softened up, loose and fluffy. And it's really also imperative to not add anything else to your mashed potato flakes until they have been hydrated. So I am working on getting these to where I know the consistency is really fluffy. You want to actually overhydrate it just a smidge, because as they sit, they will continue to soak up that water and they'll get a little bit thicker. You don't want it super watery, but you want to go just a smidgen over what you think, is ready. Then I add in my butter once everything has been hydrated. I am not adding milk because my daughter's eating these mashed potatoes, and milk, I don't have any lactose-free milk right now, but all mashed potatoes and potatoes in general need lots of salt, and my daughter and I both really love pepper, so I went a little heavy on the pepper. I do add sour cream. Now, sour cream, for whatever reason, doesn't bother my daughter's stomach as much as like milk would, and I just do a smidgen there. And if my stepson happens to see this particular video, he now knows I add sour cream to the mashed potatoes. But remember, you do love them, and you didn't know it prior to this, so it's okay. It won't hurt you, I promise. So now that my gravy is thickened, it is not like crazy thick, but it's definitely thicker. I'm going to just add in the meat. I had 2 patties in that particular jar, which is perfect for just my daughter and me. But of course, if I needed to feed a crowd, I would just open a couple more jars. No big deal. I'm going to add in that Heinz gravy and just let it simmer for a little bit while I finish getting the rest of my dinner put together to get it warmed through. Look at those. Oh my gosh, they are just so beautiful. I am quite proud of those, let me tell you. Now, during editing this, I had them sitting there for just a little bit while I finished getting the rest of my ingredients, and I could see them start to deflate, which is going to happen. I mean, there's just no way around that, but it was pretty interesting to see. And that is pretty much the final product right there. So I'm going to get my bowl plated up. I'm going to load up with mashed potatoes. I did not make quote unquote mushy peas because after reading about it, it's actually a process on how you cook your peas. It isn't just taking, canned peas and mushing them up. So that's okay. We're just going to have regular peas with tonight's dinner and the Swiss steak. And then I had some leftover cheesy cauliflower from the night before, and I definitely loaded my plate up with that. So that's before I decided to drizzle a whole slew of gravy over the top because, yes, please, I want all of the gravy. So that's pretty much what a night could look like here in my home on how I'm feeding 2 people out of my pantry without a ton of leftovers. I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you the next time we're in the kitchen.